Olympics with 15. Then we have Arthur H. Compton. He won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1927 for discovering that light had particle properties in addition to wave properties. He was part of the panel who worked on the Manhattan Project. Then we have Orville Gibson. He was a luthier who founded Gibson Mandolin Guitar in 1902. It's a famous guitar company, is still around today. Kate Douglas Wiggin. She devoted her life to the welfare of children. She started the first free kindergarten in San Francisco and wrote children's stories, most notably Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. Then we have Mary Jane Patterson. She was the first African-American woman to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree. She attended Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio, and took classes in Greek, Latin, and higher mathematics, which were considered to be men's coursework at the time. And here we have Marvin C. Stone. He improved on natural ryegrass drinking straws by designing a straw made of coiling paper around a pencil and gluing it at the ends. How about that? Then Henry James. He's known for his novels about marital relationships between cultures, but his most studied work is his novelica story, The Turn of the Screw. His other books included Portrait of a Lady, The Bostonians, and Wings of a Dove. We have Robert Todd Lincoln. He was Abraham Lincoln's only child to survive into adulthood. He went to Harvard College and served as staff to Ulysses S. Grant only at the close of the Civil War. After the war, Lincoln became Secretary of War, Ambassador to the UK, and a highly paid president of the Pullman Palace Car Company. The Pullman Car Company made railroad cars. Gustavus Swift. He founded a meatpacking empire and developed the first practical reefer, an ice-cooled railroad car. Swift used reefers to ship meat from the railway center of Chicago across the country and abroad. John Knowles Payne. He was the first prominent American-born composer of large-scale orchestral music. He was also the senior member of a group of composers collectively known as the Boston Six. Here we have Josephine Cochran. If nobody else is going to invent a dishwashing machine, I'll do it myself. Cochran was an American inventor who invented the first commercially successful automatic dishwasher. Mary Jane Patterson. She was the first African... Okay, we've already done her. Marvin C. Stone, we've done him. He was the drinking straw guy. See, Henry James. Yep. Robert Todd Lincoln. Here we go. Yep. Belle Boyle. his upper body. He moved to the U.S. in 1890, where he became known as the hardest puncher in boxing. Amos Alonzo Stagg. He was an athlete and coach in multiple sports. He was the head football coach at the International YMCA Training School, the University of Chicago, and the College of the Pacific. He played football at Yale and was on the first All-American team in 1889. Stagg was the only person inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame as both player and coach until the 1990s. Charles E. Hughes Sr. He was an American statesman, politician, and jurist who served as the 11th Chief Justice of the United States from 1930 to 1941. George Vanderbilt was the youngest son of William H. Vanderbilt. George ran the family farm on what is now Midland Beach in Staten Island. In 1888, he built his own home on 125,000 acres he purchased in North Carolina. With the aim of creating a self-sufficient estate, he pursued advancements in horticulture and hired Gifford Pinchot, future chief of the United States Forest Service, to manage the woodlands. Pursuant to his will, his wife Edith sold 86,000 acres of the estate to the Forest Service for $5 an acre. Sadie Earp. She left home at an early age. She may have made her living as a prostitute for a time. She met and became the common-law wife of Wyatt Earp in the Arizona Territory. Martha M. Place was the first woman to die in the electric chair. She was struck in the head by a sleigh when she was a child, and her brother believed that that is what left her mentally unstable. She was sentenced to death by electrocution after murdering her stepdaughter, Ida Place. Jim Devlin was an MLB player who played first base and pitcher for the Philadelphia White Stockings, Chicago White Stockings, and the Louisville Grays. In 1877, Devlin started and completed all of the Grays' 61 games, an accomplishment no other MLB pitcher has matched. Belle Starr was an outlaw who ran with the James Younger gang and was convicted of horse theft in 1883. She was fatally shot in 1889 and gained national notoriety after her violent death. Then Wyatt Earp. He was considered one of the toughest lawmen of his time. He was the city marshal in Dodge City, Kansas, and deputy marshal in Tombstone, Arizona. He owned saloons, kept a brothel, mined for silver and gold, and was a referee for boxing matches. Earp was known for his disputes with the Cochise County Cowboys and involvement in the shootout at the OK Corral. Joel Chandler Harris. He authored the Uncle Remus and Brer Rabbit stories, popular in the late 19th century. The stories were based on his time as an apprentice on a plantation. Uncle Remus was depicted in film in Disney's Song of the South. Harris was also an associate editor at the Atlanta Constitution. Samuel Sweat Green. He was considered to be the father of reference work regarding his role in American public libraries. He believed that the function of the library is to serve its users and introduce changes that many other libraries throughout the country adopted, such as remaining open on Sundays. Grover Cleveland. He's the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms until this last election. Having previously been elected mayor of Buffalo and governor of New York, he was the first Democrat elected to the presidency since 1856. Cleveland notably avoided the mayoral system, retaining many nonpartisan Republican appointees in his administration. He entered office as a bachelor but married 21-year-old Frances Folsom during his first term. The tariff issue that saw him being defeated by Benjamin Harrison in 1888 backfired against the Republicans and led to his re-election in 1892. Winslow Homer was famous for marine life and landscape paintings. He began his career as an illustrator, but soon after switched to large oil paintings. He also enjoyed working in watercolor, especially during his vacations. Homer was quite prolific, but his model painting, Shooting the Rapids, remained unfinished. Jay Gould was a Gilded Age robber baron, had an estimated net worth of $72 million, or $2.05 billion in 2021 dollars. Gould built his fortune by investing in and buying railroads, including the Union Pacific and New York and Erie railroads. His sharp business practices, including issuing fraudulent stock and collaborating with William Ball's Tweed to make legislation favorable to his business. In 1869, Gould's attempt to corner the gold market brought on Black Friday. Gold prices plummeted from $160 to $133. The stock market dropped by 20%, and wheat and corn prices dropped by 50%. Thousands of speculators and farmers were ruined. Pecos Bill Shafter. He was a Union Army officer who received the Medal of Honor for his role in the Battle of Fair Oaks. He was also a Major General in the Spanish-American War. About the Philippine-American War, Shafter said, "My plan would be to disarm the natives of the Philippine Islands, even if I have to kill half of them to do it. Then I would treat the rest of them with perfect justice." Well, that's absolutely horrible. Betsy Ross. She made flags for the Pennsylvania Navy during the American Revolution and made U.S. flags for over 50 years. Ross is believed to be the seamstress who made the first American flag, though the story has not been proven. The Smithsonian Institution notes that the story of Betsy Ross making the first American flag for General Washington entered in American culture just before the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition. Stephen Girard. He was the fourth richest American of all time. He made his fortune as a sea captain, opium trader, and banker. In 1793 and 1797, Girard took care of Philadelphians during outbreaks of yellow fever, including converting a mansion into a hospital and nursing patients personally. Girard saved the U.S. government financially during the War of 1812, underwriting up to 95% of the war loan issue. His bank, the Girard Trust Company, was sold to Citizens Bank in the 2000s. The original bank building still stands at Broad and Chestnut Streets in Philadelphia as the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. Anthony Wayne. He led the Pennsylvania militia through the Revolutionary War. Called Mad Anthony for his fiery, bold leadership, he fought with distinction in the failed Canadian campaign, earning a promotion to brigadier general. Although the Continental Army continued to struggle, he persevered, and after the infamous winter camp in Valley Forge ended in 1778, he was able to hold ground at the Battle of Monmouth. Wayne's greatest victory was the Battle of Stony Point, where he defeated a superior force and helped secure the Hudson River. At the close of the war, he negotiated peace treaties with the Creek and Cherokee and served in the Pennsylvania legislature. David Rittenhouse. He was an astronomer, inventor, Thomas was the first director of the United States Mint. He personally hand-struck the first coins and gave them to George Washington. A crater on the moon and a park in Philadelphia are named in his honor. Something that's a pretty commonly told story, I can't tell you how true it is those first silver coins made at the U.S. Mint were made out of silverware given by Thomas Jefferson's wife. Benjamin Franklin. He was a writer, inventor, scientist, and statesman. Franklin fled indenture with his brother in Boston to ultimately start his own printing business in Philadelphia. He went on to achieve noteworthy scientific accomplishments, becoming a valuable contributor to the creation of the United States Constitution, and served as diplomat to France. The Culper Spy Ring. The capture and execution of Nathan Hale convinced General George Washington that a well-organized spy network was a necessity. To that end, he devised the Culper Ring, with Colonel Benjamin Talmadge at his head. The ring was able to foil a British plan to attack newly arrived French troops in Rhode Island and the plot to counterfeit continental currency. Perhaps the spy ring's most notable member was Anna Strong, who used articles on the clothesline at her new Long Island residence to signal when and where an information drop was to take place. Dolly Madison was President Madison's wife. She started a tradition of holding social events in Washington for both political parties, encouraging them to network, socialize, and negotiate in a calm manner. That sure has changed. Dolly also helped to furnish the new White House. In 1814, when the British had fired at the White House during the War of 1812, Dolly was credited with saving the classic portrait of George Washington. She ordered her personal slave, Paul Jennings, to save it. Dolly helped to define the role of First Lady for following first wives. Andrew Jackson. He was the 7th President of the United States. He was an accomplished general in the War of 1812. He had also served in the Revolutionary War, where his and his brother's mistreatment at the hands of their British captors steeled his resolve. A populist, he opposed a central banking system and made abolishing the Second Bank of the United States part of his policy, along with investigation of all executive posts to root out corruption. His Indian removal policy, the Trail of Tears, brought death and misery to thousands of Native Americans. Eli Whitney Jr. was the inventor of the cotton gin, a mechanical device that removes seeds from cotton, and a great promoter of the concept of interchangeable parts. The cotton gin made cotton a newly profitable crop, King Cotton, and discouraged the abolishment of slavery for at least another 70 years. The concept of interchangeable parts revolutionized musket manufacturing in the North and greatly contributed to the North's victory in the Civil War. John Jacob Astor. He established the Astor family in North America. Astor made his money by creating a fur trade monopoly, smuggling opium into China, and investing in New York City real estate. When he died, Astor was the wealthiest person in the United States, leaving a $20 million estate, which is 0.9% or almost 1% of the estimated United States gross domestic product at the time, and in 2020 would be worth approximately $210 billion. By comparison, Jeff Bezos was worth approximately $200 billion in 2020. Astor left $400,000 to build the Astor Library, which was later consolidated into the New York Public Library. Alright, now if you're watching this rather than just listening, please note that we've had to splice together several videos of this because it's going to be a really was causing typhoid by working as a cook, she defied their orders and continued to cook. She was linked to at least 3 typhoid deaths and 53 infections, which is just a crazy amount. She was forced to quarantine several times for a total of 3 decades. The ethical and legal issues raised by her case are still discussed. She finally died in quarantine in 1938. Belle Boyd. She was the Cleopatra of the secession. She was a Confederate spy who sent messages to Confederate officers through various means, including sending her slave with messages in a hollowed-out watch case and bluffing her way through enemy lines. Frances Hodgson Burnett. She was born in England and spent much of her life traveling to and from America, where her family settled when she was 15. She's a prolific writer, best known for her children's book, Little Lord Fauntleroy, A Little Prince, and The Secret Garden. Johnny Ringo. He was an outlaw with the Cochise County Cowboys in Tombstone, Arizona, involved in the Mason County War and charged with murder. He escaped and was a suspect in the attempted murder of Virgil Earp, who's the brother of Wyatt, and the death of Morgan Earp. Ringo was later found shot to death by a single bullet at the head. At the time, his death was ruled a suicide. However, modern writers suspect that Wyatt Earp or Doc Holliday may have fired the shot. William Morris Davis. He was born in Philadelphia and was known for his work with geology, geography, geomorphology, and his advanced theories of scientific racism. Kate Chopin. She wrote novels and short stories set in her home state of Louisiana. She published 2 short story collections and 2 novels. Her work was often condemned during her time because of her themes of interracial relationships. And Doc Holliday. Gunfighter, gambler, and dentist. He moved to the Southwest to help ease his tuberculosis symptoms and became a gambler. Prior to him actually moving out west, he was a dentist in Georgia. While in Arizona, he saved Wyatt Earp's life and they became friends. Earp became a deputy marshal, Holliday became his deputy, and they took part in the shootout at OK Corral against the Cochise County Cowboys, who had killed Earp's brother, Morgan Holliday, who died young of tuberculosis in Colorado. Frederick T. Frelinghuysen. He was a lifelong politician from New Jersey who supported both the Lincoln and Grant administrations. His accomplishments include being a U.S. Senator and Secretary of State under Arthur. Although Frelinghuysen may not be a household name, the family has been involved in American politics from the Revolution through the Carter administration. That's a total of 200 years because he got elected during the bicentennial year in 1976. Charles Folger. He had a long career in American politics, culminating with his appointment as the 34th U.S. Secretary of the Treasury. Folger had to turn down the opportunity to be the U.S. Attorney General for James Garfield, ultimately accepting the appointment as Secretary of the Treasury for Arthur. And Joseph Campbell. He founded a company in 1869 that eventually became Campbell Soup. How about that? In 1897, a chemist, John T. Dorrance, began working for the company and developed the method for condensed soup. The Campbell Soup can has become a cultural icon and was made into pop art by Andy Warhol. The condensed soup idea is pretty interesting. You know, that's why we add a can of water whenever we make a can of Campbell Soup. gone from singer to the Civil War 17th Connecticut Volunteer Infantry, of which he was a member. Howe also worked on inventing the zipper and received a patent for his work. That's pretty interesting. I couldn't tell you what the acronym stands for as far as YKK is concerned, but YKK currently makes, I think it's 75% of the zippers used in the world. Started out as a Japanese company, so I can't remember the acronym. It's a Japanese name that's difficult to say. Walt Whitman. He was a poet, journalist, teacher, and government clerk. In 1855, he published his collection, Leaves of Grass. He continued to revise and update this work throughout his life. His poems include O Captain, My Captain, and I Sing the Body Electric. Edgar Allan Poe was a writer and poet famous for Gothic horror and detective stories and poetry with a dark edge. His most famous works include The Raven, The Telltale Heart, The Pit, and The Pendulum, and The Fall of the House of Usher. Frequent themes in his work include the death of a beautiful woman, premature burial, and mourning. Poe died young, a mysterious death, possibly from alcoholism or foul play. He was found delirious on the streets of Baltimore. He was found in the gutter in Baltimore. I'm disappointed they didn't mention my favorite work of Poe's in there, The Cask of Amontillado. Abraham Lincoln. He had little formal education, taught himself law, and passed the Illinois bar in 1936. Lincoln was elected to the Illinois Assembly and leveraged that victory into a term in the U.S. House. Then he lost a Senate race to Stephen Douglas. However, his performance in those debates won him the nomination of the newly formed Republican Party. The anti-slavery views he expressed caused the Southern states to secede when he won the presidency, resulting in the Civil War. Lincoln, in anticipation of the 13th Amendment and victory over the Confederacy, issued the Emancipation Proclamation freeing all the slaves therein. At the turning point of the Civil War in Gettysburg, he declared, "Government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." Kit Carson was a fur trapper, mountain man, and Indian agent. Carson spoke several European and Indian languages and lived among and married into the Arapaho and Cheyenne tribes. During the Civil War, Carson was a Union officer in New Mexico and then led forces to suppress the Navajo, Mescalero, Apache, Kiowa, and Comanche tribes by destroying their food sources. Carson is famous for the exaggerated stories of his adventures, but ironically was illiterate. Carson helped open the West to settlers, and Carson City, Nevada is named for him. When it says removed the Native Americans' food sources, it's referring to the great buffalo kill that they held out west. Terrible, terrible. Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. He was a fireside poet famous in the 19th century. He wrote his first poem at age 13. Old Ironsides was published in 1830 and instigated the renovation of the USS Constitution, which is a famous battleship from, I think, the War of 1812. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure the War of 1812. But it's still in, I think, Boston Harbor today and available for tours. His Breakfast Table series was particularly popular. Holmes was also a medical doctor who discovered that contaminated instruments was often the cause of childbed fever. How about that? P.T. Barnum was a showman running a museum of curiosities and a variety troupe when he started his grand traveling museum, menagerie, caravan, and hippodrome in 1870. He merged his show with James Bailey's in 1881, forming what eventually became Barnum and Bailey Greatest Show on Earth. Barnum was also an author and served 4 terms in the Connecticut legislature. Chester A. Arthur. Gotta love that beard. That's something else. He became President of the United States when President Garfield was assassinated in 1881. Journalist Alexander McClure wrote, "No man ever entered the presidency so profoundly and wildly saw a need for high-quality work clothes and invented Levi's blue jeans with rivets to prevent the pockets from ripping off. Strauss went on to found Levi Strauss & Co. in San Francisco, California in 1853. He also helped establish Congregation Emmanuel, the first Jewish synagogue in San Francisco. Helen Hunt Jackson. She was a writer and activist for Native Americans. She wrote Ramona to target the mistreatment of Native Americans after the Mexican-American War. Although many readers enjoyed it for its romantic plot, Jackson also published nonfiction accounts of the mistreatment of Native Americans in the United States. She was friendly with fellow poets Emily Dickinson and Ralph Waldo Emerson. She died of stomach cancer aged 54. Henry M. Flagler. I think we've covered him. He is one of the founders of Standard Oil. He bought up competing oil refiners, made deals, and undercut the competition, basically creating the first monopoly. He was also the founder of the Florida East Coast Railway, much of which was built with convict labor, the successor to slave labor. Flagler built several hotels in his residence in Florida and is known as the father of Miami and Palm Beach, Florida. John Pemberton. I think we've covered him too. He was the pharmacist inventing the beverage that became Coca-Cola. He was stabbed in the chest by a saber in 1865 at the Battle of Columbus and because of the pain, became a morphine addict. He experimented with other painkillers, including cocaine, in hopes of finding a morphine-free alternative. This led him to invent a valuable brain tonic, which would eventually become Coca-Cola. Pemberton died in near poverty, partly as a result of his ongoing expensive morphine addiction. So, fun fact about cocaine. In the United States scheduling of drugs, cocaine is actually a Schedule II drug, which means that it has some known medical qualities. It's frequently used in certain surgeries in order to prevent bleeding from the area. Charles Curtis was vice president serving under Herbert Hoover. Curtis was a member of the Kaw Nation and became the first person with Native American ancestry to reach either of the highest offices in the federal executive branch. Curtis believed that Native Americans could benefit from mainstream education and assimilation. He sponsored and helped pass the Curtis Act of 1898, allowing Oklahoma to be settled by non-indigenous peoples. Sounds kind of like, I forget the guy's name who wrote it, but there's a good book called Custer Died for Your Sins, and it was kind of in retaliation to what Curtis did. Jane Addams. She was an activist, reformer, social worker, pacifist, and author. She founded Chicago's Hull House and the ACLU. I'm pretty sure we've covered her as well. Bob Fitzsimmons. He was a professional American boxer who was born in Cornwall, England, spent part of his early life in his family's blacksmith forge, which helped develop his upper body. He moved to the U.S. in 1890, where he became known as the hardest puncher in boxing. He became the world middleweight champion, the heavyweight champion, and the light heavyweight title. He was the first boxer to win titles in 3 weight divisions. Amos Alonzo Stagg. He was an athlete and coach in multiple sports. He was the head football coach at the International YMCA Training School, the University of Chicago, and the College of the Pacific. He played football at Yale and was on the first All-America team in 1889. He was the only person inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame as both a player and coach until the 1990s. Charles E. Hughes Sr., American statesman, politician, and jurist who served as the 11th Chief Justice of the United States from 1930 to 1941. He is also a member of the Republican Party, who also served as the 36th Governor of New York. He was the Republican nominee for President of the United States in the 1916 presidential election and the 44th United States Secretary of State. George Vanderbilt. This business was innovative because he used an assembly line method to slaughter and can hogs. He systematically utilized waste products, boasting that he made use of everything but the squeal. Upton Sinclair's muck-raking novel, The Jungle, documented some of the less savory aspects of Armour's business. Armour was worth at least $50 million at the time of his death in 1901. Melville Fuller. He rose to become the 8th Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, but many of his decisions did not stand the test of time. Fuller stood with a majority decision in the famed Plessy v. Ferguson case of 1896 that upheld separate but equal doctrine, only to have that decision overturned in 1954 by the Brown v. Board of Education. Marshall Field was the Gilded Age founder of Marshall Field and Company department stores, renowned for their exceptional level of quality and customer service. Give the lady what she wants, and the customer is always right, said Field. The Field Museum of Natural History was named after him after he endowed it with $1 million. Field donated the land for the University of Chicago. Diamond Jim Fisk was a Gilded Age robber baron, was a stockbroker and executive who helped Jay Gould gain control of the major railroad companies at the time. Fisk played a large role in 1869's Black Friday attempt to corner the gold market. On Black Friday, gold prices plummeted from $160 to $133. The stock market dropped 20% and wheat and corn prices dropped by 50%. Thousands of speculators and farmers were ruined. Fisk was murdered in the Grand Central Hotel at age 36 by Edward Stokes with a Colt house revolver. This make of revolver is now known as the Jim Fisk pistol. Joshua Slocum was the first person to sail alone around the world. He wrote a book aptly named Sailing Alone Around the World and disappeared in 1909 while aboard his boat. He spent the majority of his life on boats, and his wife and children sailed with him as well. Mary Cassatt. She was a painter known for her paintings of women, children, and the bonds between them. She painted in the Impressionist style and was a good friend of Edgar Degas, with whom she was sometimes compared. Her career continued until 1914 when cataracts took her sight. Elihu Root. He was Secretary of State under Roosevelt and Secretary of War under Roosevelt and McKinley. So, judging by the fact that McKinley's included, this would be Theodore Roosevelt. Root was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1912 for his strong interest in international arbitration and for his plan for a world court. Root helped to modernize the War Department, building it from a group of small frontier outposts and coastal defense units into a modern organized military machine. He also updated the National Guard and the Army. Root promoted preparedness so that the U.S. would be ready to go into World War II. Root was part of the defense team for Boss Tweed and a prominent opponent of women's rights to vote. Wow. Not everything everyone does is good, that's for sure. Alexander Milne Calder. He was an American sculptor best known for his work on Philadelphia City Hall. He attended the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts and won the competition to create the 37-foot-tall bronze statue of William Penn, the largest statue atop any building in the world. Buffalo Bill Cody. He began his career at age 15 with the Pony Express. Cody fought for the Union during the Civil War and was later a civilian scout during the Indian Wars, for which he received the Medal of Honor. He started his Wild West shows in 1872 with Annie Oakley and Wild Bill Hickok, touring America and Europe for decades. Cody is buried on Lookout Mountain in Colorado. George Dewey. He was the only officer to ever hold the rank of Admiral of the Navy. Coming out of author, speaker, and civil rights activist in Philadelphia. He worked with Frederick Douglass to sign up 11 regiments or 11,000 men of colored troops in the Philadelphia area to fight for the Union. In 1871 in Philadelphia, on his way to vote, Caddo was confronted and shot to death by Frank Kelly. Kelly was never convicted of assault or murder. In 2016, Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney announced that the 19th century Martin Luther King would be honored with a bronze statue at City Hall. It was the first public monument in Philadelphia to honor a specific African American. Alright, so let's go to the box for our next stack. Ornithologist, marine biologist, and author. He is considered one of the founders of the studies of ecology. Beebe traveled around the world publishing books, articles, and drawings, and advocating for conservation. Beebe is best known for his deep dives in a bathysphere to study marine life. Charles Horace Mayo. He founded the not-for-profit Mayo Clinic in Minnesota with 6 partners, including his brother William. Mayo insisted on sterile conditions in the operating room, which contributed greatly to surgical success. Mayo earned the Distinguished Service Medal for advising the U.S. Army Surgical Services in World War I. The Mayo Clinic is one of the foremost medical treatment and research institutions in the world. Within Mayo's lifetime, it registered 1 million patients. Maud Booth. She was the daughter of an English rector. In 1886, Maud married Ballington Booth, the son of the founders of the Salvation Army. Maud and Ballington took command of the U.S. Salvation Army until 1896. Then they founded the Volunteers of America, dedicated to serving the poor and disadvantaged. For more than 40 years, they traveled the country to help those most in need, including founding food pantries and halfway houses to help former convicts readjust to society. Maud was a prisoner of prison reform and became known as the Little Mother of the prisons. Bobby Lowe. He was the first player in Major League Baseball history to hit 4 home runs in a single game. He accomplished the feat on May 30th, 1894, while playing for the Boston Bean Eaters. Lowe was primarily a second baseman, and when he retired, his career fielding average of .953 at second base was the highest in Major League history. Lowe tied or set records with 17 total bases in a single game and 6 hits in a single game. John Raleigh Mott. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1946 for his work with the YMCA and World Student Christian Federation. He was educated at Cornell University, where he increased YMCA membership and found his calling in the ecumenical movement, whose goal was to promote Christians of different denominations to work together. Mott wrote 16 books, traveled the world on speaking tours, and was the chairman of the International Missionary Council and president of the World Alliance of YMCAs. Mott is honored with a feast day on the liturgical calendar of the Episcopal Church on October the 3rd. Butch Cassidy. He was the outlaw leader of the Wild Bunch that terrorized the Old West, stealing horses and cattle and robbing trains and banks. The Wild Butch Gang was responsible for the longest string of successful train and bank robberies in American history. In 1901, pursued by the Pinkerton Detective Agency, Cassidy sailed off to Bolivia with a Sundance Kid, who was Harry Longabow. Legend has it that they robbed a silver mine payroll transport and then died during a shootout with the Bolivian army. Or did Cassidy escape and return to the U.S.? The world may never know. Helen Keller. She was the first deaf-blind person to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree. Born in 1880, she lost her vision and hearing as a result of an illness suffered at 19 months old. Through a series of contacts who included Alexander Graham Bell, the Kellers made contact with Annie Sullivan, an educator who was herself visually impaired. Sullivan broke through to Keller, teaching her how to communicate and becoming her lifelong companion. Helen Keller spent her life advocating for people with disabilities and supporting socialism, topics on which she wrote several books. A. Milne is best known for Winnie the Pooh. It's named after a female Canadian black bear who lived in the London Zoo during World War I, and his poems, "You're braver than you believe and stronger than you seem and smarter than you think," says Pooh. Milne also wrote plays and was the editor of Punch magazine. Milne had one child, a son named Christopher Robin, for whom the Pooh books were originally written. Unfortunately, the fame of the books was a hardship for the son, including being bullied by schoolmates and pestered by Pooh fans. A. Milne served with distinction in both world wars in the British Army. Nikola Tesla. He was born in 1856 in the Austrian Empire but became a U.S. citizen in 1891. After working for Continental Edison in Paris, he immigrated to the United States to work at Edison's Machine Works. He developed an arc lighting system while with Edison, which was not used but became one of his first patents when he left to start his own company. Tesla became wealthy by selling his alternating current motor and transformer patents to George Westinghouse and pursuing his own interests such as the Tesla coil, radio remote control, and wireless power. Louis B. Mayer. He was born in Russia and quit school at age 12 to support his family by collecting scrap metal. Then Mayer renovated small vaudeville theaters, turning them into the largest movie theater chain in New England. In Los Angeles, Mayer partnered with Irving Thalberg at the new MGM, turning it into the most successful studio in Hollywood. "If a story makes me cry, I know it's good," said Mayer. In 1937, Mayer was the first person in America to earn $1 million salary. George S. Patton. He was part of two firsts. He fought in the 1916 Pancho Villa expedition, where motor vehicles were first used in combat, and he also commanded the first use of tanks in World War I. In World War II, he commanded the 7th Army in the Mediterranean theater. After an incident where he slapped 2 soldiers, he was removed from this command and later put in charge of the 3rd Army, which was critical to winning the Battle of the Bulge. After the war, he was killed in a Jeep accident shortly before leaving his command. Alice Paul organized the 1913 women's suffrage procession the day before President Woodrow Wilson's inauguration. During the repressive political environment following the United States' entry into World War I, she and other activists were often arrested for their peaceful protests. President Wilson, to save face, pardoned her and other protesters. The work of Alice Paul and the other suffragists led to the passage of the 19th Amendment affirming women's right to vote in 1920. Hale Holden. In 1914, Holden, the president of the CB&Q, Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad, was the youngest chief executive at age 45 of any American railroad. He got there by successfully defending CB&Q's right to set railway rates in the Supreme Court. In 1916, Holden was the spokesman for the railroads during negotiations to avert a nationwide strike of train employees for an 8-hour day. During World War I, he was director of the USRA, or the United States Railroad Administration. Ty Cobb. Nicknamed the Georgia Peach, he was born in Narrows, Georgia. He was an American Major League Baseball player who set 90 MLB records during his career. Cobb played 22 seasons with the Detroit Tigers and finished his career with the Philadelphia Athletics. He had a career batting average of .366 and holds many records to this day. Cobb stole home plate a record 54 times, 21 more than the runner-up. He is the youngest player ever to compile 4,000 hits and score 2,000 runs. Hugo Black. He was a U.S. Senator and the 5th longest-serving justice of the Supreme Court. Before Before becoming a U.S. Senator, Black was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. That's the kind of Supreme Court justice you want. As senator, he filibustered against an anti-lynching bill. During World War II, he supported the internment of Japanese Americans. Overall, Black was considered one of the most influential Supreme Court justices and a supporter of liberal policies and civil liberties. That's ironic. Says he left behind a checkered legacy. That's for sure. Jim Thorpe. He was a member of the Sac and Fox Nation and the first Native American to win a gold medal. He was a well-rounded athlete and won 2 gold medals in 1912 in the pentathlon and the decathlon. He also played football, baseball, and basketball. Thorpe played professionally in MLB and in the NFL. He was the first president of the American Professional Football Association, which became the NFL in 1922. The Associated Press named him the greatest athlete of the first 50 years of the 20th century. The town of Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, is named in his honor. Cole Porter. He was a songwriter famous for both musicals and his swing charts, such as Night and Day, I've Got You Under My Skin, and Begin the Begin. He continued to produce even after suffering a horse riding injury, composing for You Never Get Rich, starring Fred Astaire, and his most acclaimed work, the musical Kiss Me Kate. Arthur H. Compton. He won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1927 for discovering that light had particle properties in addition to wave properties. He worked on the Manhattan Project and was part of the scientific panel that recommended the use of the atomic bomb to end the war in Japan. After the war, Compton researched X-rays and gamma rays. The Compton crater on the moon and the Compton Gamma Ray Observatory satellite were named in his honor. Walker Hagen. He was a professional golfer who won 11 professional majors, and we've covered him already. The Barrymore family, we've covered them. We've covered Francis Ouimet. I don't think we've covered Christy Mathewson. An MLB pitcher had many nicknames, including the Christian Gentleman. He refused to pitch on Sundays because of his Christian beliefs. Mathewson played 17 seasons with the New York Giants and was among them one of the most dominant pitchers in baseball history. He led the Giants to victory in the 1905 World Series by pitching 3 shutouts. He was one of the first 5 members of the Baseball Hall of Fame. Tom Mix grew up in Pennsylvania, where his father, a stable master, taught him to care for and ride horses. He became a riding and shooting expert, winning several competitions and joining a Wild West show. He appeared in 100 silent films for Selig Polyscope, then 160 for Fox Film. Moving to talkies in the 1930s, he performed in 9 films for Universal, but decided to retire due to the injuries from years of performing his own stunts. Channing Pollock. He was a playwright who wrote for several of the Ziegfeld Follies and the scripts for notable films of the silent era, such as The Evil Thereof. His family narrowly escaped violence and disease during the Revolution of the 44 in El Salvador, where his father, a diplomat, perished of yellow fever. Grantland Rice. He was a sports writer whose work was published in newspapers and broadcast on the radio. He played football and baseball at Vanderbilt University. His style of writing was considered to be inspirational or heroic and compared games to ancient combat and players to demigods. Rice wrote for the New York Tribune, and his column was nationally syndicated in 1930, after which he became known as the Dean of American Sports Writers. Douglas MacArthur. Graduated at the top of his West Point class, he began his military career with distinction during the occupation of Veracruz, rose to the rank of brigadier general, and was decorated several times during World War I. He later became superintendent of West Point and, after leaving the Army, military advisor to the Philippine government. When World War II broke out, he took command of the Far East forces. After losing the Philippines to the Japanese and ultimately forced to withdraw, he declared, "I shall return," and fulfilled this promise in 1944, being awarded the Medal of Honor. He accepted accepted the surrender of Japan on September the 2nd, 1945. Harry Vardon. He was a British professional golfer, a member of the Great Triumvirate with John Henry Taylor and James Braid. Vardon won the Open Championship 6 times and also won the 1900 U.S. Open. With his success, he became a golf superstar. Vardon toured the United States and Canada and was the first professional golfer to discard proper dress and play in knickers. Stephen Crane is best known for his Civil War novel, The Red Badge of Courage. He was published by the time he was 16 and wrote both fiction and nonfiction prolifically until his untimely death from consumption or tuberculosis at age 28. His short life was filled with success and scandal, but his legacy is one of a brilliant writer with timeless themes of reality and idealism. Newton D. Baker. He came to prominence as the mayor of Cleveland from 1912 to 1915. President Wilson then appointed him to be his Secretary of War during World War I. Baker selected General John J. Pershing to command the American Expeditionary Forces that he insisted act as an independent unit. Cordell Hull. He was FDR's Secretary of State from 1933 to 1944. Hull was instrumental in promoting Roosevelt's good neighbor policy of non-intervention and non-interference in the domestic affairs of Latin America. Hull created a post-war peace organization modeled after the League of Nations, the United Nations. President Roosevelt called Hull the father of the United Nations. Hull won the Nobel Prize in 1945 for this work. Wee Willie Keeler. He is nicknamed Wee Willie for his 5 foot, 4.5-inch height. Was one of the best hitters in baseball history. He has the highest career at-bats per strikeout ratio in MLB history. Keeler went more than 60 at-bats between strikeouts. Keep your eye clear and hit them where they ain't, was his advice to hitters. He played for the Baltimore Orioles, Brooklyn Superbas, and the New York Islanders. Keeler hit over 400 once and hit 206 singles during the 1898 season. See, we've covered Jane Addams. Not sure about Charles Curtis. He was vice president. Yeah, we've covered him. That's right. Laredo Taft. He was a sculptor famous for his fountains, most notably the Fountain of Time in Washington Park, Chicago. This was the first public artwork to be made of concrete. He also wrote The History of American Sculpture in 1903, the first book to be written on this topic. Susanna Medora Salter. She was the first woman elected to serve as mayor in the United States. She did not know she was on the ballot until the polls opened. That's crazy. Her name was proposed as a stunt by a group of men who were looking to discredit and humiliate women. That stunt was an author, novelist, and socialite. She began writing after her sons went to boarding school. She is well known for her rules of etiquette, and articles about how to behave in society. She also wrote about architecture and interior design, novels, and numerous travel books. William Jennings Bryan. William Jennings Bryan was a politician who ran 3 times as the Democratic nominee for president in 1896, 1900, and 1908. He served in the United States House of Representatives and as the Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson. At age 36, Bryan was the youngest person to receive an electoral vote for president. has set the precedent for evidence presentation that relies on expert testimonies and was the first Jewish person to serve on the Supreme Court. John J. Pershing. As commander of the American Expeditionary Forces in World War I, Pershing was able to quickly push the German army back from the bulge it had occupied for 3 years. His part in the 100 Days offensive led to the German request for an armistice. Pershing also oversaw the creation of a new boot to combat trench foot and the creation of the first military police corps. Only Pershing and George Washington have held the rank of General of the Army. GCB, Most Honorable Order of the Bath, or a British Order of Chivalry. Grandma Moses took up painting as a vocation in her 70s. Her sentimental, old-timey subjects and colorful, whimsical style made her popular almost immediately. Her paintings were eventually exhibited in the New York Museum of Modern Art, and in 1969 she was honored with a U.S. postage stamp. Pete Browning was one of the best hitters in Major League Baseball, playing from 1882 to 1894. His .341 batting average remains one of the highest in MLB history. He was nicknamed Gladiator and the Louisville Slugger. Browning paid very close attention to the types of bats he used and was the first player to have his bats custom made. He played through serious medical issues that rendered him virtually deaf and gave him headaches. James Naismith. He was a physical educator, physician, Christian chaplain, sports coach, and inventor of the game of basketball. He wrote the original basketball rule book and lived to see basketball adopted as an Olympic sport in 1936 and the inaugural NCAA tournament in 1939. Naismith created the game to help rowdy students and track athletes stay in shape during the winter. The first documented game was played in December of 1891. William James Mayo, we've covered him. Richard Warren Sears began his career after receiving a shipment of watches. Sears Roebuck and Company started as the R.W. Sears Watch Company. The Sears catalog catered to rural customers because he knew what they needed and how to ship the merchandise to rural homes. Casey Jones was a railroad engineer known for his punctual schedule and was immortalized in the song The Ballad of Casey Jones. He was killed in a train collision when his passenger train collided with a broken-down train in Vaughn, Mississippi. George Washington Carver suggested the farmers should rotate their plantings periodically with crops that return valuable nitrogen to the soil, such as soybeans and peanuts. Carver became famous for devising many uses for soybeans and peanuts to encourage their use. He gained respect from Congress by testifying in favor of protective tariffs for peanut crops, a bold action for a black person in the 1920s. Anna Maria Jarvis founded Mother's Day in 1908 to honor her mother, who would always wish for such a holiday. Jarvis chose the white carnation to symbolize the sentimentality of the day. However, in later years she was angry at the commercialization of the holiday with cards and candy. In 1943 she had become so disgruntled that she tried to have the holiday rescinded. Jarvis died in a sanitarium, her medical bills paid for by the floral and greeting card industry. She is buried in Pennsylvania next to her mother. James Henry Breasted was the Egyptologist and archaeologist who coined the phrase Fertile Crescent to describe archaeologically significant areas of the Middle East. Breasted worked on several nickname Aesop of Indiana for the fables he wrote in the vernacular, such as Pink Marsh and fables and slang. Ade's non-standard punctuation and capitalization make his style distinctive. Big Ed Delahanty was an MLB player renowned as one of baseball's first power hitters. He batted over 400 three times and has the fifth highest career batting average in MLB history. Crazy Schmidt, a pitcher for the Giants and Orioles, said of Delahanty, "When you pitch to Delahanty, you just want to shut your eyes, say a prayer, and chuck the ball. The Lord only knows what will happen after that." He was elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1945. The Sundance Kid was a ranch hand, a saloon owner, and a quick draw. In 1896, he joined Butch Cassidy and the Wild Bunch, the gang responsible for the longest string of successful train and bank robberies in American history. Longabaugh was wanted dead or alive, with a $30,000 bounty on his head. In 1901, the Sundance Kid, his mysterious wife Etta, and Butch Cassidy sailed to Argentina, then Bolivia, to escape the Pinkerton Detective Agency. In 1908, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid robbed a silver mine courier and were killed in the ensuing gunfight with the Bolivian army. Molly Brown was a philanthropist and a Titanic survivor. As the Titanic sank, Brown helped evacuate the ship by rowing a partially full lifeboat and demanding for the lifeboat to be sent back to rescue more people. Upon rescue by the Carpathia, Brown organized the other first-class survivors to help the second and third-class survivors. Brown leveraged her Titanic fame in support of juvenile courts, the rights of workers and women, and education. During World War I, she helped wounded French and American soldiers and was honored the French Legion d'Honneur. Because she's the reference for the unsinkable Molly Brown. Hobart Bosworth began acting on stage to fund his painting lessons. He had a good career on stage, although tuberculosis forced him to take breaks from acting. In 1913, he started a production company that eventually merged with Paramount and allowed him free rein to produce, act, and direct films. Charles Dana Gibson portrayed an iconic American standard of beauty with his Gibson girls at the turn of the 20th century. His work appeared in Life magazine for more than 30 years and was originally based on his wife, Irene, and her 4 sisters. In 1918, Gibson became the editor of Life until his retirement in 1936. Florence Edward Ziegfeld Jr. was known for the Ziegfeld Follies and producing the musical Showboat. That was a pretty short one. Cy Young, one of the hardest throwing MLB pitchers in the game. He held numerous pitching records, including the most career wins, most career innings pitched, games started, and complete games. Young led his league in wins for 5 seasons and pitched 3 no realized that making music was the only way he knew how to make a living. Berlin wrote at least 1,500 songs performed by artists including Louis Armstrong, Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley, Nat King Cole, and Doris Day. They are still being covered by modern performers including Lady Gaga and Michael Bublé. You can recognize that face anywhere. Charlie Chaplin. He was an English actor and director famous for his silent films City Lights and Modern Times, which are silent film masterpieces. His screen character, the Tramp, is iconic around the world. The Tramp struggles against adversity and combines slapstick with pathos. The Great Dictator was his first sound film. It satirizes Adolf Hitler. Chaplin co-founded United Artists, which allowed him to keep control over his films. C.P.T. Barnum. Yep, we covered him. Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. Yep, we covered him. Alright, back to the box for more cards. This should be our last stack of these base cards before we move on to short prints and whatnot. Let's see, Doc Holliday, we covered him. Kate Chopin. She wrote novels and short stories set in her home state of Louisiana. She published 2 short story collections and 2 novels. Her work was often condemned during her time because of her themes of interracial relationships. William Morris Davis was born in Philadelphia and was known for his work with geology, geography, geomorphology, and his advanced theories of scientific racism. We've covered him too. Johnny Ringo, we covered him. Frances Hodgson Burnett. She was born in England and spent much of her life traveling to and from America, where her family settled when she was 15. She became a U.S. citizen in 1905. She was a prolific writer, best known for her children's books, Little Lord Fauntleroy, A Little Prince, and The Secret Garden. Her adult romances and regular columns in magazines were also well received. Old Hoss Radbourne was a pitcher who played 12 seasons in the MLB. During Radbourne's time with the Providence Grays, he won 60 games in a single season, an MLB record which has never been broken. Radbourne led the Grays to the 1884 World Series win, pitching every inning of the 3 games. Radbourne was inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame in 1939. Thomas Nelson Page was a writer and a diplomat. He served as the ambassador to Italy from 1913 to 1919 under President Wilson. He is famous for his collection of short stories In Old Virginia, which reflects life in the antebellum South. Howard Powell was an illustrator who taught both at Drexel and the school he started called the Howard Powell School of Illustration Art. He is well known for his articles in Harper's Magazine and his children's book, The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood. Cap Anson. Adrian Cap Anson was one of baseball's first superstars and played a record 27 consecutive seasons. He was the first to tally over 3,000 career hits and played most of his career with the Chicago Cubs. Anson's nickname is a shortened version of Captain. Anson had a role in National Gallery of Art and Carnegie Mellon University. King Camp Gillette created the best-selling version of the safety razor, which included the first inexpensive disposable steel blades. Founded in 1901, Gillette sold 51 razors and 168 blades in its first year. In 1915, that's 14 years later, Gillette sold 70 million blades alone. 1877, Devlin started and completed all of the Gray's 61 games, an accomplishment no other MLB pitcher has matched. His 1.9 career ERA is the third lowest of all time among pitchers with at least 1,000 innings pitched. Devlin was banished permanently from MLB after admitting to throwing games and costing the Grays the pennant in the 1877 Louisville Grays scandal. Martha M. Place was the first woman to die in the electric chair. She was struck in the head by a sleigh when she was a child, and her brother believed that is what left her mentally unstable. She was sentenced to death by electrocution after murdering her stepdaughter, Ida Place. I know we've covered John Jacob Astor, we've covered Eli Whitney Jr., we've covered Andrew Jackson, Dolly Madison, the Culper spy ring, we've covered Berlitzer, now we've covered Philip Armour, Melville Fuller, yep, we've covered him, Marshall Field, yep, we covered the department store guy. I know we've covered Diamond Jim, because who can forget that nickname? Jesse James, Hale Johnson, a lot of Crabtree, we've done that one. We've done Pinkham Ryder. We have done Deacon White, Washington Irving, James Fenimore Cooper, Samuel Morse. Looks like a lot of these we've already done. Vanderbilt, Bryant, Bosworth, Molly Brown, Sundance Kid, Big Ed, George Ade. We've covered Taft, Mathewson. I don't recognize this one. Edgar Rice Burroughs was an American fiction writer who specialized in adventure, science fiction, and fantasy genres. He is most well known for his story Tarzan of the Apes. A radio series, television series, and several movies are based on Tarzan. Roger Ward Babson studied engineering at MIT and persuaded the dean to include a business engineering course, the forerunner to the MBA degree. Babson became a business theorist and forecaster, developed market trendline indicators, and predicted the crash of 1929 on September 5th, 1929. Sooner or later, a crash is coming, and it may be terrific. Babson was a successful entrepreneur and investor and founded 3 universities. In 1940, Babson was the Prohibition Party candidate for president. Thornton Waldo Burgess wrote 15,000 stories for his column, Bedtime Stories, and more than 170 books. The column is best remembered for his stories about Peter Rabbit. The character Peter Rabbit was also written about by Beatrix Potter. Laws regarding character name usage were less strict in the past. A conservationist, his stories often depicted the beauty of nature. Thomas Watson Sr. was a self-made industrialist and the chairman and CEO of IBM from 1914 to 1956. Watson began his career as a NCR, or National Cash Register, salesman, working his way up. By fair means and foul. In 1912, NCR was found guilty of violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. Watson and 26 other NCR executives were sentenced to prison. In 1915, their convictions were overturned on appeal, and Watson was hired by IBM. Watson's relations with Nazi Germany were problematic. IBM supplied the census punch cards used by the Nazis to track Jews. Honus Wagner played 21 seasons in MLB from 1897 to 1917, mostly with the Pittsburgh Pirates. He won 8 batting titles, still a National League record. Wagner was nicknamed the Flying Dutchman because of his speed and German heritage. Most historians consider him to presence on radio. Virginia Apgar was an obstetrician who developed the Apgar scale, a way to measure the health of a newborn baby. We still use that today, by the way. Her work led to improved treatment for premature infants and greatly reduced infant mortality through the 20th century. Apgar was also noted for giving talks on teen pregnancy and congenital disorders at March of Dimes events in the 1960s. We measure Apgar scores today at birth and then 5 minutes afterwards to make sure that things aren't going downhill. James Stewart had a big breakthrough in the 1938 film You Can't Take It With You. He won his first Oscar with Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, achieved the rank of colonel in World War II, and later starred in It's a Wonderful Life, a movie that was initially a failure but over time became one of the most beloved Christmas movies. Chuck Berry had his first hit in 1955 with Maybelline, which reached number 1 on the Billboard Rhythm and Blues chart. The 1956 follow-up, Roll Over Beethoven, crossed over to the top 100 chart at number 29. His greatest single may have been Johnny Be Good, released in 1958, and considered one of the greatest songs of all time. Berry put another 12 singles on the charts over the remainder of the 1950s. He had a few more hits in the 1960s, including No Particular Place to Go, before rounding out his career on nostalgia tours. Berry was one of the first musicians inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Robert Johnson was a Delta blues legend who lived a short and mysterious life. Wait, this is an error. I don't know who this old white guy is, but that ain't Robert Johnson. That's pretty crazy. How about that? It says that he lived a short and mysterious life with only a handful of recordings to his name. Johnson did not become widely known until the 1960s, 25 years after his death. He pioneered a playing style that was emulated by generations of blues and rock guitarists. He is now recognized as a master of the blues, particularly the Delta blues style. He is considered by those who take stock in the cultural phenomenon the first member of the 27 Club. That's a group of famous musicians who all died at age 27. This dude ain't 27. I'm just saying. Johnny Cash released his first 2 singles, Hey Porter and Cry Cry Cry, in 1955. Since then, his music has spanned the genres of country, rockabilly, and rock and roll, and sold over 90 million records. His live recordings at the Folsom and San Quentin prisons, along with his early struggles with drugs, cemented his outlaw image. Robert Vaughn was an actor best known as Napoleon Solo in the television show The Man from UNCLE. His film credits include The Magnificent Seven, Delta Force, and Bullet. He won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for his role in The Young Philadelphians. One of my favorite Supreme Court justices, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was appointed to the Court of Appeals by President Carter and to the Supreme Court by President Clinton. Ginsburg was the second woman to serve on the Supreme Court. She became known for her strong liberal views and her dissents. Her dissents are legendary. If you get a chance to read them, they can be funny at times. Before she served on the court, she was an attorney who argued women's rights cases and volunteered for the ACLU. There's Johnny Cash again. Jane Withers started acting on radio shows at age 3. At 5, she was acting in films. She had a supporting role in Bright Eyes, starring Shirley Temple. Withers' breakout role led to a contract with Fox and starring roles in Ginger, Patio Day, and Pack Up Your Troubles. Unhappy with the roles being offered to her in her teen years, she wrote and starred in Small Town Deb, some of Elvis Presley. The king of rock and roll grew up in a shotgun shack and went on to be one of the highest selling solo artists of all time. His first single for RCA, Heartbreak Hotel, went to #1 on the Billboard chart and was followed by 17 more #1 hits over 3 decades. After serving during the Korean War and acting in several popular but poorly reviewed movies, Elvis's popularity began to wane. He sported a new look and sound with the '68 comeback special. Presley passed away in 1977, but his home in Memphis, Graceland, is still visited by hundreds of thousands of fans every year. Marvin Gaye. The Prince of Motown found success first as a session player and songwriter, then in a series of duet recordings with Mary Wells, Kim Weston, and Tammy Terrell. His political consciousness was displayed in his hit What's Going On, followed by Trouble Man and Let's Get It On. Sexual Healing spent 10 weeks at #1 in 1982. Gaye was tragically killed by his father in 1984. There's another Robert Johnson issue. It's definitely not Robert Johnson. I think there's only one known picture of Robert Johnson, and you can tell this is really young black man holding a acoustic guitar in the picture. There's Chuck Berry again. James Stewart. Let's see, we've already done him, and Virginia Apgar after that. But the next one's a new one, and that is Bill Hewlett and David Packard. Those two names sound really familiar together. Bill Hewlett and David Packard co-founded the Hewlett-Packard Company, HP, in a single-car garage in Palo Alto. HP's first big job was producing audio oscillators for Walt Disney's critically acclaimed Fantasia. Steve Jobs got his start at HP, although he failed to sell them on early Apple computers. The HP garage is now an official California historical landmark, marked with a plaque proclaiming the birthplace of Silicon Valley. James Stewart had a big breakthrough in the 1938 film You Can't Take It. We've already done him. I don't know why I can never recognize him. There's Virginia Apgar again. There's Benny Goodman again. There's Robert Johnson, not Robert Johnson again. Alright, Chet Huntley. We've done him. There's the first one of the short prints we did. June Duprez was an English actress who starred in The Thief of Baghdad before moving to Hollywood, where she acted in several low-budget films. Her films included Calcutta and The Brighton Strangler. She continued her acting career on and off Broadway. Just checking to see. Okay. Alright, we'll do these first. Alright. That's enough racket. That's enough racket. I'm going to use these incorrect Robert Johnsons to separate these last few sections here, so that they're kind of a surprise when we get to them. Alright, I'm going to shut this and get it back in frame. There we go. Alright, so those 10 here were the alloy parallels, and these next 5 are what they call aurora parallels. I think they're short printed even further. Especially this, because this is a regular red short print on top of being numbered. But you see how shiny they are. That's how they kind of let you know that's what it is. So this is Dean Martin. Yeah, this is number 3 of 25. In 1945, a young singer named Dean Martin joined up with Jerry Lewis in a comedy act. The team produced many successful films together until Martin went solo in 1956. He became successful in his own right as an actor, a solo singer, and in the Rat Pack with Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. Harriet Tubman. 3 of 25. Was an abolitionist and a political activist. She was born a slave and escaped north to freedom. She made 13 trips back to the South to rescue approximately 70 slaves through the Underground Railroad. That had to take some incredible courage. During the Civil War, Tubman served as a cook, nurse, armed scout, recruiter, and spy for the Union Army. After the war, she cared for her elderly parents in Auburn, New York, established a home for elderly African Americans, and was active in the women's suffrage movement. Tubman was inducted into the Military Intelligence Hall of Fame in 2019. That's really cool. I did not know that was a Hall of Fame that existed. That'll be neat to look into. Charles Horace Mayo. Numbered 1 of 25. Founded the not-for-profit Mayo Clinic in Minnesota with 6 partners, including his brother William. Mayo insisted on sterile conditions in the operating room, which contributed greatly to surgical success. Mayo earned the Distinguished Service Medal for advising the U.S. Army Surgical Services in World War I. The Mayo Clinic is one of the foremost medical treatment and research institutions in the world. Within Mayo's lifetime, it registered 1 million patients. And he died in 1939, so that's crazy to imagine. Here's another one of the regular short prints. There's a number card. Walter Tetley. Love that old school microphone there. Number 3 of 25. Walter Tetley was a voice artist during the golden era of radio. Specializing in child voice characterizations, he also provided the voice of Sherman in the Mr. Peabody cartoons and Felix the Cat. He also had dozens of extra roles in film, most of them uncredited. And then Boss Tweed. William McGeer Boss Tweed was called Boss for his leadership of the Tammany Hall Democratic political machine. He was the 3rd largest landowner in New York City, a director of the Erie Railroad and the 10th National Bank. Tweed became an alderman, a congressman, and the Grand Sachem of Tammany Hall. Tweed hired his friends, bribed his rivals, accepted outrageous kickbacks, and supported self-serving legislation. In 1877, This is number 156 of 200. So not the best in the world, but you can kind of see there that it's got the actual 35mm film in there. That's so neat to me. I'm going to try to sleeve the next one first and see if that prevents that glare. So here we have Hayden Christensen in Star Wars Attack of the Clones. This is numbered 193 of 200. Well, that didn't help at all, so we'll try to do it a little bit differently on the next one. We've got Sean Connery in The Rock, 68 of 347. The Matilda title screen, 74 of 105. Sorry about the noise. I'm about to stand up and try to see what it is that y'all are seeing with this. Oh, okay. Y'all can actually see that pretty well. That's good. I didn't realize that y'all could see it that well without the flashlight. Next we have Billy Crystal and Monsters Inc. 234 of 300. Elijah Wood in Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, 39 of 50. I don't think you can see that one quite as well. Not that that's really helping that much. Oh well, I'll tell you what, we'll just name them off and y'all are going to have to trust me that this is actually the scene that's on there. Ron Livingston in Office Space, 62 of 100. Gotta be one of my favorite movies. Love that movie. I need to get a red stapler. Winona Ryder and Daniel Day-Lewis in The Crucible, 190 of 200. Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen in Star Wars Attack of the Clones. Pam Ferris and Matilda, 63 of 75. Looks like that's what someone's screaming there. I don't remember the scene from the movie, but it looks pretty funny. Chris Wedge in Ice Age. That must be the squirrel because I can see the nut in that particular piece of film. 469 of 700. Sorry, I had to reach and get some more sleeves. This one is Scenes from Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, 10 of 25. Ms. Alternative ASMR, I love this one. This is where the students being levitated off the ground. It just shows their feet starting to lift up. Drew Barrymore in The Wedding Singer, 75 of 118. Pam Ferris and Matilda, 49 of 75. The Monsters Inc. title screen, 27 of 260. the same scene as earlier. I think it's a few frames later. Ian McDiarmid in Star Wars The Phantom Menace, 5 of 75. Billy Crystal and Analyze That. I'm not familiar with that particular movie. 60 of 80. Mini Driver and Gross Point Blank, 16 of 50. Natalie Portman in Star Wars The Phantom Menace, 42 of 100. Jackie Chan in The Legend of Drunken Master, 227 of 408. Elijah Wood in Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, 25 of 50. Winona Ryder and Daniel Day-Lewis in The Crucible, 78 of 200. I think that these are actually numbered frame by frame because that looks earlier in that same scene as the others that we have. Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen in Star Wars Attack of the Clones, 121 of 150. And lastly, we've got Billy Crystal and Monsters, Inc., 276 of 300. And this is when he's at the window there, getting his assignment. And that concludes all of the film pieces that are included in here. A total of 25. Next, we're going to have what they call the Employees Pick Lenticular, which is going to be Frank Lloyd Wright. It says it's got his famous house there over the waterfall that says no house should ever be on a hill or on anything. It should be of the hill, belonging to it. Hill and house should live together, each the happier for the other. That's a really neat card. It's kind of like when you turn and it moves, kind of holographic thing. It says this is number 13 of 25. This is by Crystal Herring. A huge source of inspiration to me is American architect Frank Lloyd Wright. His clean lines and integration of nature in his work speak to me and are calming to look at. Visiting his home is something I enjoy doing with friends and family. That's pretty cool. It lets you kind of get in the minds of the people who design and make these cards. That's pretty neat. Let's see. And then next we've got our autograph, which is George Middleton. So this is a cut autograph because he was alive long ago. If I'm not mistaken, George Middleton was a famous playwright. Don't quote me on that, but that's definitely very neat. Gotta make sure y'all can see that good. Looks like it's cut from a letter. And lastly will be what they call the garment card, which is, how about that? That's a neat garment card there. It's a piece of William Shatner's shoe. What I really appreciate about historic autographs is not only like for this George Middleton autograph, if you go on their website, they'll show you what document they cut this from so you can actually see the piece of history that this was attached to. With this particular document card, as part of the card itself, they Congratulations, you've received an authentic piece of actor William Shatner's clothing.